Josh. So I'm going to just quickly go through the develop a prototype plan sheet that you posted for us to do. So my point of view statement is that diverse and naturally curious students need a way to be creatively engaged in their work while taking ownership of the direction and structure of their learning in a way that encourages risk-taking when working on long-term projects and daily lessons, because they need to be empowered as co-creators of their own learning with a sense of purpose to feel that their learning matters. And my how might we statement was, how might I allow for a flexible timeline to allow students to have the ability to decide how much time to spend on assignments and concepts while making sure to get through the curricular outcomes. I did have a second how might we statement that I really liked and that my peers thought were really good, but it talks about creating rubrics and methods of assessment that are flexible to kind of apply to diversity of projects, but at the same time are consistent and clear with the program outcomes. But because I am just working in this prototyping process and creating kind of the schedule and the ideas for a whole year plan, I don't really have the ability to create these assessments. So this would be kind of like my next prototyping would be in my personal career, probably when I actually teach, would be how I can create those rubrics and methods of assessment. So my promising solution would be that kind of whole year plan for students that would include all of these things that I'm looking for, which are that the program of outcomes is included, the ideas are big and relevant to the kids, it allows for diverse exploration of topics, there's time for inquiry within the schedule, so it allows for flexibility on how long projects takes and when they'll be handed in. It includes long-term projects, but also lesson topics, so those lessons that will kind of help inform their projects, but also correspond to the program of studies outcomes. And it somehow includes the community, so it has an impact either on the community or they get to share their findings with the community. So the action timeline that I wrote for this is that first I will go through the process of planning a whole year, and I'll make sure to check off all of these things that I'm looking for, and I'll write down the steps that I took when actually making this whole year plan. And that will be my first iteration. And the second iteration, I will look over those steps again and then use them to plan another year in another course. So for in my case, I made a Science 10-year plan already, and I will be making a Bio 20 and a Science 9-year plan. So not super detailed, but just kind of like the general outline. And then that way I can reflect on kind of that design process that I myself went through and determine if any of the steps felt unnatural, if I actually would do anything differently to make it better, and what the key steps of this design process is for me to be able to include all those things I want in the unit plan. And so the prototype that I did create was a Science 10-year plan. So I looked at all of the different kind of units that we had and looked for general themes. And I did incorporate all the things I wanted to. But I think more important than that prototype, because that's kind of like a 1 year, just if I'm teaching Science 10, it'll be applicable. I actually was more interested in the steps that I took to create that prototype. So I made a list of my process. Let me just pull that up here. And I wrote how to make a year plan, my method. So I would go through the program of studies, copy and paste outcomes and goals into the categories of yearly themes and topics, the general unit outcomes, and then the specific topics within the units. Then I would come up with overarching products or projects that would meet all of the yearly themes, so something that could relate to all of the units that we're studying. And then I'd come up with components of those big projects that would be kind of individual smaller projects within each unit to meet the specific unit outcomes. And within that, I could break down the projects into parts, intermediate deliverables, assignments, labs, tests, quizzes, etc. that would meet all of those very specific outcomes in each of the concepts. And from this, I kind of start from the big idea and I work my way down. So that was my kind of thinking, and what ended up interestingly being the product, the final product of this kind of iteration is that list. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and do the process again, design that Bio 20 Science 9, and see if this sort of process year plan works for me. And hopefully I can come up with something at the very end, which will be both a really great prototype for actual units that I could use for my future, but also this really great prototype of kind of a design process for me that I can use in future planning. Yeah, so the documentation that I will collect, I obviously can't really collect anything on how I will teach these units, but I can get peer feedback or feedback from some of my friends that are still in school, and they could tell me how they feel about it, and I will kind of share this process with my peers to get feedback on the actual design process that I went through. So like if that kind of list and me walking through designing that unit could help them maybe use that in their design process to make those kind of interesting whole year plans that are relevant to students. So yeah, so let me know what you think. I know I kind of ended up going away from creating the one unit or the 1 year prototype for one subject. I found that that was kind of less important and meaningful to me. But it was more of the design process and kind of understanding my own thinking and the best kind of like action steps, the best protocol for actually developing these years would be for me and what would help me the most as a designer. So yeah, let me know. Thanks.